Everybody, I think we're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to see if we've got any others looking to join, and then we will get started. We'll just start off by having a look at a few kind of high-level stats. If you've ever been to any Microsoft presentations, you'll know that they love these stats about how many apps we need in the world and everything's so in high demand, which it actually is. You can see here there's around 750 million new apps which need to be built by 2025. And the reason for that is because I think we're starting to realise that off-the-shelf applications don't always fit our requirements. A lot of the time you have to potentially pay for a lot of additional development to these off-the-shelf products to be able to actually customise them and make them work for you and your organisation. And although we do like to say, you know, you're not that unique, your challenges in your business are probably quite similar to a lot of other organisations, you do also have your unique circumstances where you do need to tweak something and make it work in a way that is good for you. And the other stat we can see here, 50% of digital work can be automated with current technology. So this isn't like we're talking in the future, we can create all these amazing things. This is now, we've got the capabilities to actually use the technology available, particularly the technology available with Microsoft to start automating our workload. And the problem that we tend to see with that statistic is that people are concerned around losing their job to automation. But the thing that we always need to remember here is that it's about automating the boring stuff and giving your staff the ability to do more meaningful work, learn, develop their careers in a much more meaningful way without having to do those really boring data entry jobs and things like that. So we can see that there's a huge amount of demand, but there's also not enough supply either. So there's not enough developers for all these solutions. And it's not really feasible for that to be the case anyway. If you take your classic developer who's probably maybe been to university, who's done all these different courses and learned all these different coding languages, there's not going to be enough people in the world to be able to master all of these automation challenges. So with this 4 million developer shortfall, we need to make sure that we're basically allowing other people to develop and build applications and automations without necessarily having that classic development background. And we see it, and I'm sure a lot of the Microsoft partners see it, and probably a lot of your organizations potentially, hiring tech talent, it's so in demand. But it seems so hard recently to be able to find the people who actually have those capabilities. So this is kind of the key message of the presentation and what the Power Platform is all about. It's accelerating developers. So we're not saying, you know, we don't need developers anymore. We've got all this low code amazing stuff and we can do it all ourselves. That is not the message that we want to convey at all. We are simply helping our developers make better use of their time and focus on those really tricky, you know, formula challenges, coding challenges that maybe take a lot of time and energy to construct. On the other hand, we also want to empower new makers. So we want to allow new people who, again, don't come from that coding background to be able to have the ability to create a workflow, to create a solution, whether it's on a personal level, whether it helps their whole team, or whether it's literally across the whole organization, and it helps them to basically make their work life a whole lot easier. So how we're going to do this is through the Microsoft Power Platform. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Power Platform, some of you maybe not so much. I just wanted to do a quick run through of what all of these are at a very, very high level. We're not really going to be focusing on all of them today, but just so you're familiar with what there is and what the Power Platform can do. So firstly, Power Apps, who's in the name with this one, application development, so it can be creating a blank application, which maybe hooks into your Excel spreadsheets, to your SharePoint data, to your on-premise data sources, whatever it may be, bringing that into a nice modern interface that your users can take out on their tablets or mobile devices, or even just sitting at their desk in Microsoft Teams and be able to do some really powerful stuff. Power Automate, automating, it's basically creating any sort of workflow process. It might be approvals, it might be copying data from one system to another. The list goes on and on about what is achievable with Power Automate, and we're going to be having a look at a couple of examples of that very shortly. Power BI, This is where we're surfacing our data. So we're bringing that data from maybe an app, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, maybe SharePoint, maybe a SQL database, and bringing our users the ability to just do some really powerful analytics on that data to be able to plan better for the future and improve our business decisions. Power Virtual Agents. This is those annoying little chatbots that you get when you are on different websites, usually annoying delivery companies where you can't actually get through to a human. But don't be against Power Virtual Agents and chatbots. They do have a lot of really useful power to them. It's probably one of those things that a lot of organizations aren't so fussed about initially, but it might be something a little bit further down the line that you may look into. And Power Pages, essentially the kind of first three that you can see here on the screen, they're all a bit more internal based, internal apps, internal workflows to basically help your internal processes. Power Pages is where you can start using that more business to customer interaction, publish data, have a little data entry system for people to provide feedback. Maybe it's for people to submit tickets. Basically, any sort of customer facing portal, that is what Power Pages is really used for. And down at the bottom, these are all the things that kind of sit alongside it. And I'm not going to spend too much time covering these because some are a bit far and beyond what we actually need to discuss today. The main one that we want to focus on is data connectors. So you can't really do much in the Power Platform without connecting to some sort of data from somewhere. So it might be your Office 365 suite, it might be your databases, it might be a third party such as Adobe Sign or MailChimp or something like that. So they are really the core of what pieces together all these other applications. I'm just going to skip over the bottom ones because I'm a bit concerned about time, but if you've got any questions, please bring it up at the end. Okay, so low code is here to empower everybody. So I've already touched on this. Your developers, we want to make their life easier. Your IT admins probably want to make their lives easier as well. So maybe it's a new starter process where they've got to create a user in Azure AD, being able to make their lives a little bit less challenging and making sure that all the IT questions don't always lead to the IT team. If you've got those people, and we tend to call them super users who have the power to just get on and do things themselves, it avoids us having this huge IT backlog that, let's be honest, never actually really ever gets completed. And then finally, your business and frontline workers. So we want to make the lives easier for our employees. We want to make sure that they're enjoying what they do. We want to avoid them kind of doing things that take a long time, helping people become more efficient and make better use of their time at work, basically. So just before we move on to a very hopefully short demo, maybe will be a little bit longer depending if I have any disasters, if the demo gods are on my side or not. But let's just touch on how Power Platform can unlock value across your business. So application modernization, this isn't just for creating a new application from scratch with its own database. It might be that you've actually got data sitting around in other systems or spreadsheets and things like that, and you want to basically create a more modern way that your employees can use those applications. What we can do is hook up on-premise systems. We can hook up those systems that nobody really likes interacting with and create a nice user-friendly interface to basically modernize that application without necessarily having to say, right, yeah, we're throwing that completely in the bin and we're starting from fresh, which is lovely to be able to do, but we know that it's not realistic for a lot of companies. Extending line of business systems, so a little bit similar to what I've just mentioned. If you've got those sort of more old school systems and the data just doesn't really speak to anything else, it doesn't integrate well with anything else, we can use the Power Platform to enable it to do that. So it might be that you've got a pretty old school finance system and you want to send data into the HR system or into your sales system. We can do that with the Power Platform using workflows and automations to basically marry things up that actually you would never think would work well together. Next, Power for professional developers. Again, we've touched on this one a couple of times already, bringing the ability for your pros to be able to spend more meaningful time on the real development challenges rather than the more mundane, little bits and bobs and little requests that come in here and there from different users in the business, and they're not maybe the best use of those pro developers' time. Enhancing your employees' experience. So it's really what helps us make sure that our employees are happy. If they've got systems that are efficient and that allow them to do the job that they need to do without any challenges, that is going to make their life happier, their work life happier, their work life easier, and also help with things like their career progression. So whether it's creating a interface that's just nice and simple and easy to use without a million clicks to get to one little button, that's going to really make a huge difference on their productivity. Empowering departments. So although we're speaking about kind of how the Power Platform can impact your business, probably just focusing on one department at a time and looking at the challenges that they have can really create some great functionality for the whole business to benefit from. And what we often find is, because the Power Platform allows you to build up these different blocks and you've got one little section and then you add something to it, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, those departments can then share with other departments. The other departments might want to use a piece of that solution to do something for their processes. So you can start empowering your departments in their own kind of departmental areas, and then those benefits can really start spreading out across the business. And finally, optimizing with hyper automation. So this is your machine learning, your AI and all that good stuff. So although we can create whizzy workflows to do all sorts of different things, we can now use AI and machine learning to go that little bit further in advancing some of those workflows, and meaning that there needs to be even less user interaction than there would have been maybe 2-3 years ago. Okay, so moving on to the demo. As I've said, I've wanted to keep this fairly simple, fairly straightforward, because I just wanted to show you the sort of simplicity of creating an automation and how much of an impact that can have to your business without necessarily needing to do a great deal. So what we're using here is Power Automate for a workflow, and we've got a feedback form here, and we've also got opportunities which are living in Dynamics. So just to start off with, I just want to clarify, zoom out, zoom in, that you don't need Dynamics to do something like this. If you're at a stage in your organization where all of your opportunities and deals and things like that currently live in an Excel file, that's not to say that you can't create something like this. You've got more risk of user error, but it is possible. We'll always recommend you to use an actual data entry system to do something like that. But, those options are there. If you're not quite there in your business yet, if you're not quite developed enough to have those bigger systems, then you can absolutely use something like Excel, SharePoint, or whatever other database system that you've got. So just keep that in mind, that this Dynamics portal that we're seeing here, it's not the kind of main focus of the demo today. Okay, so what I'm looking at here is some opportunities. These are just general sales opportunities. And what I want to do is, when an opportunity closes, I want to go and send off a feedback form to the person who the deal was related to, and get some feedback from them, and also get a net promoter score from them. Again, you probably wouldn't do this in this sort of a situation, but it's just for the sake of the demo. So here we've got our opportunity. And what I want to do, as I say, send out that feedback form. So to do that, I'm going to use Power Automate. And let's just go to the correct workflow, which is my send feedback form workflow here. And I'm going to come in and edit this just to show you how simple this workflow actually is. So we've pretty much got 4 or 5 steps here. So my first step is when a row is added, modified, or deleted. So again, this would be where you'd say when a row gets added in Excel, or when a row gets changed in SharePoint, whatever it may be that's related to whatever system you're using. So here I'm saying when something gets modified in my opportunities table, I want this to work at the organization level. So anybody in the organization, this workflow will be triggered for, which is great because it means that we're creating something for the entire business without really having to do that much. And then I've just got a filter here to say where my state code equals 1. Don't worry about this too much, but this is basically to make sure that this doesn't trigger on every single change that gets made in the system. We only want this workflow to run when the state code, so when the status is equal to 1, which is number 1 in the back end. But yeah, don't worry about that too much. So what I'm then doing is composing the contact. You don't need to do this. This is more just to show you the information that I can capture from this initial step. So I'm getting who was the contact that this was related to. Because we're using the dynamics, this contact here, Sydney, is a record because it's a lookup to a person that sits in another table. So this person's actually going to live in our contacts table. It's not like we're just storing their email address in this field. So that's why we need to go in my workflow and do a little bit more digging to find out what the email address is of that person. So I've got my contact record itself. So that's going to have email, phone number, etc., etc. Then I'm going to go to my contacts table just to pull out that extra information and say, find me the person where the contact ID is equal to the ID of the contact associated to my opportunity. And then all I'm going to do is send an email to that person's email. I've just put my email in here for this instance, just so you can actually see what the email looks like. And then it says, hi, grabs their first name, and then says, thanks for being a customer. Please, can you complete the feedback form? Nice and simple. So something like that probably would have taken me 5-10 minutes. If you were, a little bit less advanced with the Power Platform and needed to do a bit of Googling alongside, I can't see something like this taking more than half an hour. Okay, so that's what happens when we trigger our closure of an opportunity, when we close it as 1. The feedback form that we want to send out, very, very simple. Again, this is very quick to create. I'm just using Microsoft Forms. You can use whatever form entry system that you may have, but Microsoft Forms ties in quite nicely with your Microsoft 365 licensing and all that jazz. So in my Microsoft form, I'm asking for what their name is, what their experience was, a couple of ratings, and then how likely they are to recommend us, which is that Net Promoter Score, which is probably the most essential part of this process. So we want to make sure that that gets sent off to the person when that workflow gets triggered. So let's get my opportunity and close it as 1. And I'm just going to click OK here, and let's do a little prayer that the demo gods are looking out for me. But if not, I've got a backup in case it doesn't trigger for whatever reason. Maybe we'll just go into one of the old ones just in the interest of time, but I'm sure it will come through shortly. So that workflow has been triggered. We can see all these steps have completed successfully. So with my compose there, when I got the ID of that record, you can see this is that backend identifier of who that contact is. It then goes to my table, pulls out that contact and all the information about them. Looks a bit of a mess, but things like their full name, anniversary, first name, all that good stuff is going to be achieved from that record. And then I'm going to send my email, and you'll see, because I've just seen the email notification come through, that that's completed successfully. So that means that we should have an email addressed to Sydney over here. So yeah, here we go. So this would go to that external person. Please, can you complete the form? They follow the link and they go and fill the form out. And then that will bring me on to the next sort of phase of this whole process. But before I do that, just to go back to the workflow, in terms of how you can advance this and make this a lot better, it's pretty basic at the moment, but you could have a really beautifully HTML formatted email to go out to them. You probably would want a nice little button for the follow the link, or, something to make it look a little bit nicer rather than just pretty much plain text, which I've got at the moment. And essentially what you want to do is probably not pester them with a feedback response as soon as this opportunity has been closed. So just as an example, if you wanted to do something like that, we could come in here insert a new step and say that we want a delay. And then we might say, give it 5 days before we start pestering them for some feedback. And then that delay will be acknowledged by the workflow, and it will just sit there and wait until 5 days have passed before it then goes and sends off the email. So that's just a very simple change that you can make to this. I'm sure you've probably got other ideas of whizzy stuff that you can do here, and I'm absolutely open to discussing any kind of other opportunities that you could do with this towards the end. So moving back to my my feedback link. So I'm going to go to the feedback form. I'm now this customer who's just been requested the feedback. I'm going to start my entry. Can't remember what the last name was. And I'm going to say that it was pretty bad. I'm going to say the communication was 2, order process was 3, and I'm going to say that I would only give them a 4 in terms of recommending to a friend or colleague. So then I'm going to submit this information. And this is where it brings me on to my other part of the workflow, which is a separate workflow altogether. I just wanted to throw this one in there just to show you kind of a complete loop of how something like this would work. So when feedback gets submitted, let's go in and edit this. So whenever someone completes the form, basically, we want to post a message in a chat or a channel to say, some feedback's been submitted, have a read, and all I've done is pulled out the bits of response information from that form. And just as a little extra thing here, I've got a condition to say that if my recommended rating, so my net promoter score, is less than or equal to a 6, I want to also send an email saying there's a demoter identified, go in and speak to the customer or do something about it. I'm not quite sure what you do in those sorts of situations, but just as an example, all I've put here is please review the feedback and investigate the issues, but you would probably put a lot more information in there and maybe direct them to the response or put a bit more of the response information in there. So let's just confirm that that's worked. So in my team, I can see that this new feedback submitted has come through. You'd probably maybe want that going to the sales team or something like that. And then because my net promoter score was only a 4, it means it's also triggered my email. Oh, wrong one. This one that said my score's 4 and to go and review the issue. So that would maybe be something that goes to your head of sales, or I don't know who it would be, sales managers, those sorts of people, to highlight and make sure that people know when there are those kind of bad situations that are coming up from the feedback form. So very simple process, couple of workflows with a few steps in, wouldn't take any more than an hour. And this is giving you some really, really valuable data. You may then bring that into Power BI and start reporting on it and report on that feedback and start identifying where these challenges are coming from, by, you know, looking at, oh, it's always when opportunity type A is the case that we start having these problems with client feedback. So you can really start to get a lot out of something that's very, very simple and straightforward. Okay, back to the slides. I think I've only got 1 or 2 more. So just to kind of start finishing this presentation off, why would you use the Power Platform? So improving employee experience, we touched on that a lot, basically making people's lives easier. Reducing costs, instead of having to go to those third parties and they keep charging you a fortune every time you want to change one little field from a drop down to a text entry or something like that. You can bring a lot of the development in-house. It may be that you work with a Microsoft partner to find that sweet spot of, we'll do this, and then we'll come to you to do the more advanced stuff. Secure and scalable. So you've got all your security backed by the Azure and all of the stuff, the single sign-on and everything like that within the Microsoft 365 suite. So we know that it's secure in line with our other business systems. And you've also got additional things like DLP policies to make sure that you can only, certain data can only interact with certain connectors and things like that. And effortless integration and extensibility, we probably rarely see an application that is done forever once we've built it. There's always opportunities for building more. It's that kind of building block system where you can keep adding and adding and adding. You have a never-ending list of things that you can keep on doing to it, and you keep capturing that feedback from other users. And it really kind of ensures that you're making these applications the best that they can be, and also rolling them out a lot quicker without necessarily having to have it absolutely perfect first time. And just to touch a bit more on the integration, integrating with those systems that don't really seem to talk to very much, integrating with the rest of your 365 suite, because that's kind of where you're working already. There's a lot of potential there as well. Just one super quick final point, because I know that we are running a little bit close to time. How you can kind of get started with this. So envisioning, so probably looking at maybe just a few of those key challenges. Where are these kind of bottlenecks in the business? Where do things start slowing down and taking such a long time? For us internally at Espria, it's always been reporting, getting data from all these different systems, and it's taking some people like 2 weeks to build a report. So we've started automating a lot of these processes to make that data collection a lot more efficient and bringing it into Power BI. Onboarding, so identifying those champions, again, like the super users I mentioned earlier. These are real key players with anything that you do in the Power Platform. You want your champions to basically bring their teams on board to help you start showing the value of the Power Platform and what it can do for you. And also that communication with the community to keep people in the loop. If you're building something, get that feedback from different people. If you've rolled out phase 1, get some feedback before you roll out phase 2 to try and really improve those applications. And finally, scalability. So you've got things like your center of excellence in the Power Platform, which probably a little bit too advanced if you're just getting started, but it's basically a way of kind of getting a bit of oversight of everything that's going on. Who are the people who are doing a lot of development in the Power Platform? Who seems to be having challenges? Who's doing a lot and maybe needs a bit of support? And maybe we can provide some training to those people. And in terms of scalability, again, we've sort of touched on it before, having those different phases, not exactly requiring something to be perfect first time, and putting maybe those nice to haves a little bit later down the line, just to make sure that you can start rolling your applications out or automations and getting people on board with them as soon as possible. And that is all. That seemed like a very, very quick whiz through, but it was a half an hour from what I can see. So thank you for your attention. We definitely have time for some questions, I think. So yeah, I'm assuming we're referring to a signature with an external API system. So we can handle those scenarios. That's where you start looking a little bit more advanced within things like Power Automate. With things called custom connectors or HTTP requests, that gives you a lot more advanced functionality to make those more pro code integrations with different systems, and it usually depends on what the other application is as to what kind of authentication or authentication signature you require. So it's a bit of one of those, it depends, if I'm going down the right path anyway. And in terms of what an ideal workflow would look like, probably as least steps possible. If something is seeming like it's not very, if you're building something and you think there must be a better way to do this, there must be a quicker way of doing it, there probably is. So using things like variables to capture data and change data, using things like a switch function to make sure that you're managing lots of different outcomes rather than doing lots of conditions to say, does it do this? Yes, no. Does it do this? Yes, no. Does it do this? Yes, no. That wouldn't be a very efficient workflow. So anything to kind of improve the efficiency. And if you're duplicating things a lot in a workflow, that's probably not a very good sign. And also, like the thing that I showed in the demonstration, making sure that your trigger is only being triggered when it's actually needed. Because if not, you're going to have a lot of triggers coming through. You're going to be putting, well, you've got certain limitations with the Power Platform. You can't be creating a zillion billion requests every day because that's putting too much limit on Microsoft's resources. So keep those limitations in mind and always try and reduce the amount of triggers, the amount of actions, because essentially that's going to make things quicker for you. And it's also going to reduce how much resources you are using. Very long answer for you there. Oh, okay, just seen the message around DocuSign. Yeah, DocuSign is one of the out of the box integration actions with the Power Platform, with Power Automate in particular. Can't see it really being used in the other ones, but yeah, there is functionality in there for DocuSign already. And yeah, I don't think there'd be any requirement for using APIs or anything like that for DocuSign. But yeah, they do work nicely together. I'm pretty sure I've done something around it in the past. Integrate with those systems. Any other questions? You can always, I guess, drop us an email over or something if you have something a little bit more private that you want to discuss.